December 1895. A Fifth Avenue mansion glowing with lights against the early winter darkness. Snow is falling softly on the street outside, muffling the sound of carriages arriving one after another. Inside, hundreds of guests in evening dress are gathering for a wedding. The ballroom has been transformed. White roses and lilies are everywhere, their scent mixing with the evergreen garlands already in place for Christmas. Candles flicker on every surface. The gas lighting has been turned up to make everything brilliant. A temporary altar stands at one end of the room, decorated with white silk and orange blossoms. The bride appears at the top of the grand staircase in white satin, her dress featuring a train that stretches 20 feet behind her. Her veil is held in place by a crown of orange blossoms. She's carrying a bouquet of white roses. She looks terrified. This wedding has been planned in 6 weeks, from engagement to ceremony, in less than 2 months. The guest list includes 400 people. The reception will feature a 12-course dinner. The gifts displayed in an adjacent room are worth tens of thousands of dollars. The whole event will cost approximately $15,000, the equivalent of nearly $500,000 today. And this is entirely typical for a Gilded Age December wedding. Tonight, we're exploring why December became the marriage season for wealthy families during the Gilded Age, why the period from Christmas through New Year's was when society weddings happened, how the strategic timing worked, debutantes introduced in October and November, engaged by December, married by January. We'll talk about the compressed timeline that seems impossible by modern standards, the elaborate ceremonies in private mansions, the trousseau that required an entire wardrobe, the European honeymoons lasting months, and the reality that many of these romantic winter weddings were actually arranged marriages negotiated between families. This is about how wealthy families used the holiday season as the backdrop for launching young women into marriage, often with remarkable speed and sometimes against their will. If you're watching with tired eyes and an overthinking mind, this story is for you. If you really enjoy these bedtime journeys through history, please like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I always love knowing where these stories are keeping you company. Let's talk about when December was marriage season. To understand why December was the wedding season, you need to understand the structure of the Gilded Age social calendar, because the timing wasn't random, it was strategic, carefully planned to move young women from debut to marriage as quickly and efficiently as possible. The social year followed a predictable rhythm. Spring and summer meant Newport season for those who summered in Rhode Island, or traveled to Europe for families who preferred that. This was leisure time, but also an opportunity for young women to be seen, to meet potential suitors, to begin forming the connections that might lead to marriages. Fall was the debutante season. October and November were when young women came out, were formally introduced to society through carefully orchestrated balls and parties. These debuts announced that a young woman was now available for marriage. She'd completed her education, she was of appropriate age, usually 18 or 19, and her family was ready to receive offers. The debut itself was a significant event. A family might host their own ball specifically for their daughter's debut, or they might arrange for her to be presented at a larger society event. Either way, the debut marked a transition from childhood to marriageable young woman. And then came winter. December and January were engagement and wedding season. This was when the matches made in fall were formalized, when proposals happened, when weddings were celebrated. The timing was deliberate. Mothers orchestrating this process wanted their daughters engaged quickly after debuting. A young woman who came out in October should ideally be engaged by December, 2 months later. If she was engaged by Christmas and married by New Year's or early January, that was perfect. That meant success. Why the rush? Several reasons, all of them revealing how this system worked. First, staying on the market too long was considered problematic. If a young woman went through an entire social season without getting engaged, People would start wondering what was wrong with her. Was she too particular? Too difficult? Did she have some flaw that made her undesirable? The longer she remained unmarried after her debut, the more her value as a marriage prospect seemed to decline. Second, the compressed timeline limited the young woman's ability to develop her own preferences or resist family pressure. If you met a man in November and your mother was pushing for engagement by December, you didn't have much time to really get to know him, to consider your options, to potentially say no. The speed worked in the parents' favor if they wanted to arrange a particular match. Third, a December or January wedding signaled that the debutante season had been successful. It meant your daughter was desirable, that she'd attracted appropriate attention, that the family had successfully launched her into marriage. This reflected well on the family's social standing. The timing also worked practically. Extended families would be in town for the holidays anyway, so gathering guests for a wedding was easier. Houses were already decorated for Christmas, which saved some effort and expense in preparing for a wedding. The festive atmosphere of the holiday season provided a romantic backdrop. If a wedding happened in December or early January, that was ideal. If it happened in late January, that was still fine. The courtship had perhaps taken a bit longer than optimal, but nothing alarming. If a wedding didn't happen until February or March, that suggested something had gone slightly wrong. Maybe the engagement had been delayed. Maybe there had been difficulties in negotiating settlement. The later in the season a wedding happened, the more it suggested complications. And if a young woman went through an entire social season, fall debut through spring, without getting engaged, that was concerning. Her mother would be strategizing about how to present her again the next season, how to explain the delay, and how to maintain her daughter's prospects despite the setback. This system created enormous pressure on young women. You had a narrow window to attract an appropriate husband. Your family's expectations were clear. Your mother was actively managing the process, introducing you to suitable men, encouraging particular matches, discouraging others. You were expected to be charming, attractive, accomplished, and then to accept an appropriate proposal quickly when it came. The whole process could happen with remarkable speed. A young woman might meet a man at her debut ball in early November. They'd encounter each other at various social events throughout November. He'd call on her at her home, formal visits supervised by family. By mid-December, he'd propose. By New Year's or early January, they'd be married. The entire courtship, from meeting to marriage, might span just 2 or 3 months. By modern standards, this seems insane. Today, couples typically date for years before getting engaged, then take 12 to 18 months to plan a wedding. The idea of meeting someone in November and marrying them in January seems impossibly rushed. But for Gilded Age families, this was normal, even desirable. The system was designed for efficiency. Young women were prepared for marriage from childhood, educated in appropriate subjects, trained in social skills, taught to be attractive prospects. When they debuted, they were ready to marry. The parents' job was to find appropriate matches quickly and formalize them. And the holiday season, with its festive atmosphere, its social gatherings, its romantic associations with winter and Christmas, provided the perfect backdrop for proposals and weddings. Beyond the strategic timing, there were practical and aesthetic reasons why Christmas through New Year's became the wedding season. The most obvious was that houses were already decorated. If your family had spent thousands of dollars decorating the mansion for Christmas, evergreen garlands, flowers, lights, the whole elaborate display, those decorations could double as wedding decor with some modifications. For a wedding, you'd add white flowers to the existing arrangements. White roses, white lilies, white orchids mixed in with the Christmas greenery. You'd add white ribbons to the garlands. You might add white candles in addition to the coloured ones already in place. The Christmas decorations provided a base that could be adapted for a wedding without starting from scratch. This wasn't primarily about saving money. These families had unlimited budgets. It was about logistics. Decorating a mansion for a wedding would normally take weeks of preparation. If you were planning a wedding on a compressed timeline, 6 to 8 weeks from engagement to ceremony, using existing Christmas decorations saved crucial time. The winter setting itself was also romantic. Snow falling outside while the mansion glowed with warm light inside created a fairy tale atmosphere. Carriages arriving through snow-covered streets, guests in furs and evening clothes entering a brilliantly lit entrance. It was visually stunning. Gas lighting and early electric lights added to the magic. These were still relatively new technologies. Most homes used gas, but the wealthiest families were beginning to install electric lighting in the 1890s. Having your mansion lit brilliantly for a winter evening wedding, hundreds of gas jets or early electric bulbs blazing, created an effect that was both impressive and beautiful. Candles added to the atmosphere. Winter weddings often happened in late afternoon or early evening, when natural light was fading or already gone. The ceremony would be lit by candles and gas lighting, creating soft, warm illumination that was genuinely romantic. The holiday season also had the right emotional tone. Christmas was associated with family, celebration, generosity, hope for the future. These were appropriate associations for a wedding. The festive atmosphere of the holidays made the wedding feel like part of a larger celebration rather than an isolated. For guests, attending a wedding during the holiday season was also convenient. They were already in town for Christmas and New Year's celebration. They were already in social mode, attending parties and dinners. Adding a wedding to the schedule wasn't difficult. Many guests would attend multiple weddings during the season. It was just part of the social circuit. The timing also worked well photographically. Society pages would cover these weddings extensively, describing the decor, the bride's dress, the guests, the gifts. A winter wedding with snow and elaborate decorations made for impressive descriptions. The newspapers could paint romantic pictures in their coverage, which pleased the families and maintained their social standing. The romantic ideal of a winter wedding, snowfall, mansion glowing with lights, bride in white against evergreen garlands, the warmth inside contrasting with cold outside, became firmly established during this era. That image of winter wedding beauty persists today, even though the context has completely changed. What we often forget is that for many brides, the romantic setting obscured a less romantic reality. The beautiful decor and winter atmosphere didn't change the fact that many of these weddings were happening with remarkable speed between people who barely knew each other, often under family pressure. But the setting mattered. It created the appearance of romance, the aesthetic of a love match, even when the reality was more complicated. The period from Thanksgiving through New Year's was also prime proposal season. Young men who'd been courting young women through the fall would make their moves during the holidays, creating a flurry of engagements that would then lead to January and February weddings. The proposal process followed certain patterns. The young man would typically ask the father's permission first. This was absolutely required. You didn't propose to a young woman without her father's consent. Some brave men might propose first, and then immediately go to the father, but the standard practice was father first, then the young woman. Christmas parties provided natural opportunities for these conversations. Families would host holiday gatherings. The young man would attend. At some point during the evening, he'd find a private moment with the father to make his request. If the father approved, and if the man was from an appropriate family with adequate resources, he usually would, then the young man could proceed with the actual proposal. The proposal to the young woman might happen that same evening, or might be planned for a specific romantic moment. Christmas Day was popular. New Year's Eve or New Year's Day were also traditional times. The holiday setting provided natural romance for the moment. The ring had become standard by the 1890s. Earlier in the century, engagement rings weren't universal, but by the Gilded Age they were expected. The ring needed to be impressive. A significant diamond or other precious stone set in gold or platinum. Tiffany and Cartier were the preferred sources for wealthy families. A young man of appropriate social standing would visit one of these establishments, possibly with his mother's advice, to select a ring. Custom designs were common for the wealthiest families, a ring designed specifically for this bride, incorporating her family's preferences or traditions. The cost could range from $500 for a respectable ring to $5,000 or more for something truly impressive. In today's money, that's $15,000 to $150,000 or more. The ring was a significant investment, a visible demonstration of the young man's resources and his seriousness about the match. Diamond solitaires were becoming increasingly popular during this period. The tradition of diamonds as the engagement stone was still relatively new. It really took off in the late 19th century, but by the 1890s, diamonds were the expected choice for wealthy families. Once the proposal was accepted, the announcement followed quickly. Many couples announced their engagement on Christmas Day or New Year's Day. This allowed them to tell family gathered for the holidays, and it created a natural timeline for a January or February wedding. The newspaper announcement would appear within days. Society pages would report the engagement, describing the families involved, noting the young man's prospects and the young woman's connections. These announcements were carefully worded to emphasize the appropriateness of the match, both families' social standing, any notable ancestors, the groom's education or career, the bride's accomplishments. The engagement period was brief by modern standards. 4 to 8 weeks from engagement to wedding was typical. Some couples had even shorter engagements. Engaged at Christmas, married by mid-January, meant less than a month. This compressed timeline was considered proper. Long engagements suggested uncertainty or problem. During the engagement, the couple would see each other at social events and during supervised visits. The young woman would be planning her trousseau, her wardrobe for married life. The families would be negotiating financial settlements, what the bride's family would provide as dowry, what provisions the groom would make for his future wife. These negotiations sometimes took longer than the courtship itself. The engagement also meant the young woman would receive gifts from family and friends, jewelry, decorative objects, personal items. Some families hosted engagement parties during the holiday season, adding to the festivities. For the bride, the engagement period was busy. Dress fitting, trousseau planning, gift acknowledgement, learning about her future home and responsibilities. For brides marrying into European aristocracy, the dollar princesses, there was additional preparation about titles, protocol, and what would be expected in their new roles. The whirlwind pace must have been overwhelming for some young women. Meeting someone in November, getting engaged in December, planning a January wedding, while also managing all the holiday social obligations. It didn't leave much time for reflection, for really getting to know your fiancé, for having second thoughts, which was probably partly the point. The compressed timeline reduced opportunities for brides to change their minds, especially in arranged marriages where family pressure was significant. If you've ever planned a wedding, or known someone who has, you know the timeline is typically 12 to 18 months. That's considered normal. Time to book venues, hire vendors, send invitations, coordinate everything. Gilded Age weddings happened in 6 to 8 weeks. From engagement to ceremony in less than 2 months. How was this possible? First, an unlimited budget. Money solved most logistical problems. Need flowers on short notice. Pay premium prices. Need a dress in weeks instead of months. Hire additional seamstresses to work faster. Need caterers available immediately. They'll make room in their schedule for the right price. Second, full household staff. The bride's family had dozens of servants who could be deployed to wedding preparation tasks. Need invitations hand-delivered? Send footmen? Need the ballroom transformed? The regular staff could do it. Having people whose job was already serving your family meant you could redirect their labor toward wedding planning without hiring additional help. Third, professional services were readily available. The wedding industry was developing during this period. Florists, caterers, musicians, dressmakers, all were accustomed to working with wealthy families on tight timelines. They understood the expectations and could deliver quickly. Fourth, limited guest involvement. Modern weddings often include input from bridesmaids, groomsmen, and extended family. Everyone has opinions about venues, themes, colors. Gilded Age weddings were controlled entirely by the bride's mother. She decided everything. This eliminated endless discussions and negotiations that slow down modern planning. Fifth, standardized expectations. There wasn't much customization. Weddings followed predictable patterns: ceremony in the mansion ballroom, reception with seated dinner and dancing, white flowers, standard menu. You weren't creating something unique, you were executing a familiar formula. The bride's role in planning was minimal. She would be consulted about her dress and maybe about flowers. Everything else was handled by her mother and the household staff. This was actually a relief for many brides. One less thing to stress about during an already overwhelming time. The mother, on the other hand, was completely in charge. She would coordinate with caterers about the menu, with florists about decorations, with musicians about the reception. She'd oversee the guest list, approve the invitations, and manage the logistics. For a major society wedding, this was a substantial project even with unlimited resources. But mothers of debutantes had been preparing for this. They understood what was required. They knew the vendors and the standards. They could execute a wedding quickly because they'd done this before or watched others do it many times. The invitations needed to go out within days of the engagement. These were formally engraved on heavy cardstock. A rush order might cost extra, but it could be done. The engraver would work overtime to produce several hundred invitations quickly. The trousseau required more time. The bride needed an entire wardrobe for married life, dozens of outfits for various occasions. This couldn't be done in weeks. Often, mothers would begin preparing their daughters' trousseaux before engagement, anticipating that marriage would happen soon. By the time the engagement was announced, much of the trousseau might already be in progress. The dress was its own major project. The wedding gown required multiple fittings and extensive hand sewing. Elaborate dresses with long trains, detailed lacework, and custom embellishments took time to create. 6 weeks was tight, but manageable, with multiple seamstresses working simultaneously. The menu had to be finalized with caterers. The flowers had to be ordered, keeping in mind that getting certain flowers in winter was difficult and expensive. The musicians had to be booked, the house had to be prepared, and all of this happened while the regular holiday season's social obligations continued. The bride and her mother were still attending Christmas parties, hosting their own events, managing their household's holiday preparations. The wedding planning happened alongside everything else. For modern readers used to lengthy wedding planning timelines, this compressed schedule seems impossible. But it worked because the system was designed for efficiency, the resources were unlimited, and the expectations were standardized. The rushed timeline also served another purpose. It didn't give cold feet much time to develop. If you had doubts about your engagement, there wasn't much time to dwell on them before you were walking down the aisle. Most Gilded Age weddings for wealthy families happened at the bride's family home, not in churches or other venues. The mansion provided everything needed: space for hundreds of guests, elaborate decor already in place, control over every detail. Transforming a mansion ballroom into a wedding venue required some adjustments, but built on existing architecture. The ballroom would be cleared of furniture except for chairs arranged in rows facing one end. A temporary altar would be constructed, usually a decorated platform with flowers and fabric, sometimes with religious symbols depending on the family's denomination. The decorations emphasized white roses, white lilies, white orchids, thousands of dollars worth of white flowers arriving on the wedding day. These would be arranged throughout the ceremony space, along staircases, in the entrance hall. White silk ribbons would be added to existing evergreen garlands. White candles would supplement other lighting. The effect was meant to be both impressive and romantic, a grand space transformed into something special for this one occasion. Guest capacity depended on the mansion's size. A modest Fifth Avenue mansion might accommodate 200 guests for a wedding. The larger establishments could handle 400 or 500. The Vanderbilt mansions could host even more if needed. Timing was typically late afternoon, 4 or 5 p.m. This allowed guests to arrive in daylight, but meant the ceremony and reception would extend into evening, when gaslighting or electric lights would create the desired atmosphere. The ceremony followed standard religious protocol. Most wealthy families were Episcopalian, Presbyterian, or occasionally Catholic. The minister or priest would arrive to perform the service, which lasted 20 to 30 minutes and followed traditional patterns: processional, vows, rings, blessing, recessional. The processional was particularly impressive in mansions with grand staircases. The bride might appear at the top of the staircase, then descend to the main floor where the ceremony was held. This created a dramatic entrance. Everyone watching as she came down the stairs in her elaborate dress with its long train, her father beside her. Music accompanied all of them. Some families had organs installed in their homes specifically for such occasions. Others hired small orchestras to provide appropriate music. Wagner's bridal chorus for the processional, Mendelssohn's wedding march for the recessional, hymns during the ceremony itself. The ceremony was formal and scripted. There were no personal vows or customized elements. The minister or priest delivered standard religious language. The couple exchanged traditional vows. It was solemn, dignified, appropriate, not particularly personal or unique. The bride and groom rarely made eye contact during the ceremony. She would be nervous, focused on not tripping on her train or fainting. He would be equally formal, following protocol. There wasn't much room for emotion or spontaneity. After the recessional, the couple would retire briefly while the space was transformed from ceremony to reception. Chairs would be removed or rearranged. Tables would be set up for the dinner. The whole transition happened quickly while guests mingled in other rooms. The efficiency of these transitions was impressive. A staff of 30 or 40 people could transform a ballroom in less than an hour, moving from ceremony setup to reception setup without visible chaos. These mansion weddings were private in a way modern weddings often aren't. Only invited guests attended. There were no curious onlookers, no public access. The experience was entirely controlled by the family, maintaining the exclusivity that was so important to Gilded Age society. The wedding dress was a major expense and a significant status symbol. For wealthy Gilded Age brides, the dress cost anywhere from $500 to $3,000 or more, $15,000 to $90,000 in today's money. Some ultra-elaborate dresses for the most prominent families cost even more. White satin had become the standard by the 1890s. This tradition was still relatively new. Queen Victoria had popularized white wedding dresses when she married in 1840, but it took decades for the fashion to become universal. By the Gilded Age, white was expected for wealthy brides. The elaboration was extreme. These weren't simple white dresses. They featured trained skirts with 10 to 20 feet of fabric trailing behind. The train required attendants to manage it, bridesmaids or pages whose job was to keep the train properly arranged. Some trains were so long and elaborate that managing them was genuinely difficult. Lace was essential. Fine lace for the bodice, the sleeves, the veil. Some families had heirloom lace that would be incorporated into the dress. Lace that had been part of the bride's mother's or grandmother's dress, now reused as a connection across generations. Other families purchased new lace, choosing from expensive imported options. The veil was its own production, long veils that reached to the floor or beyond, held in place by elaborate arrangements. The traditional choice was a crown of orange blossoms, either fresh flowers that would be wired into a crown shape, or wax flowers that looked fresh but wouldn't wilt. Orange blossoms symbolized purity and fertility. Gloves were required, long white gloves, usually kid leather, extending past the elbow. The bride would wear these throughout the ceremony and reception, only removing them for the wedding ring to be placed on her finger. Jewelry was minimal. Pearls were considered appropriate, a pearl necklace, perhaps pearl earrings. Diamonds and other gems were saved for after marriage. The bride was supposed to look pure and maidenlike, not dripping with jewels. The dress was made by fashionable dressmakers, established businesses that specialized in elaborate gowns. The creation process involved multiple fittings over several weeks. The bride would visit the dressmaker's shop repeatedly as the dress was constructed, adjusted, perfected. These dresses were meant to become heirlooms. They'd be carefully preserved after the wedding, stored properly, potentially used by future generations. Some families had wedding dresses that had been worn by multiple generations of brides, though more often the dress would be preserved but not reworn, kept as a family treasure. Consuelo Vanderbilt's wedding dress, when she married the Duke of Marlborough in 1895, became legendary. It was made by Worth, the most fashionable Paris couturier. White satin with elaborate embroidery, a train that required multiple attendants. The dress reportedly cost thousands of dollars and set standards for future society weddings. But Consuelo also wrote in her memoirs about crying throughout her wedding day. The elaborate dress and spectacular ceremony couldn't hide the fact that this was an arranged marriage she didn't want. Her mother Alva had forced the match, and Consuelo went through with it despite her misery. This captures something important about these weddings. The bride was a display piece. She was meant to look beautiful, appropriate, expensive. Her own feelings about the marriage were secondary to the spectacle. The dress, the ceremony, the reception, all of it was performance, presentation, maintaining appearances. Some brides were genuinely excited. Some loved their fiancés and were happy to marry, but others were terrified, trapped, going through motions they couldn't escape. The elaborate dress and ceremony happened either way. The bride had very little agency in most decisions about her wedding. Her mother controlled the planning. Her father controlled the financial arrangements. She could express preferences about her dress, but even that was subject to family approval. If she had doubts about the marriage itself, expressing them might not be possible depending on family dynamics. For young women raised in wealthy Gilded Age families, this was the expected path. Debut in fall, engagement in winter, marriage by spring at the latest. The wedding was both culmination and beginning. Culmination of your girlhood and your family's preparations for launching you into society. Beginning of your married life and your role as a society wife. The dress symbolized all of that. The purity expected of you, the wealth of your family, the importance of this transition, the performance required of you, even if you were unhappy. Immediately following the ceremony, guests would transition to the reception. In most cases, this meant moving from the ballroom or wherever the ceremony was held to other rooms that had been set up for dining and dancing. The reception was elaborate by any standard. Wealthy families hosted seated dinners for all guests, not buffets or cocktail receptions, but full multi-course meals served by professional staff. The menu typically featured 8 to 12 courses. We're talking about oysters or other seafood as the opening soup course, usually clear soup or consommé. Fish course, elaborate preparation with French sauces. Meat courses, potentially multiple, beef, game birds, other options. Vegetable dishes, salad desserts, multiple options including the wedding cake, coffee and liqueurs. Throughout all of this, champagne flowed constantly. This was a celebration, and champagne was the required beverage. Wealthy families served only the best French champagnes, ordering cases for wedding reception. The wedding cake was its own spectacle. These weren't simple single-tier cakes. We're talking about multi-tiered creations, elaborately decorated, sometimes reaching several feet high. The cake would be displayed prominently, and cutting it would be a formal moment during the reception. The cost of the reception could easily reach $5,000 to $10,000 for a modest wedding, up to $20,000 or more for major society events. In today's money, that's $150,000 to $600,000 or more. The food, wine, flowers, music, and staff all contributed to these extraordinary costs. Seating arrangements were carefully planned. Tables would be set up throughout multiple rooms, with place cards directing guests to their assigned seats. The most important guests would be seated near the newlywed. Family relationships and social hierarchies all factored into where people sat. The dinner lasted several hours. This wasn't a quick meal, but an elaborate production where each course was served with proper timing and ceremony. The staff coordinated everything, clearing plates, serving wine, keeping the meal flowing smoothly. After dinner came dancing. The ballroom that had hosted the ceremony would now become a dance floor. The wedding cake cutting would happen first, another formal moment with the bride and groom cutting the first slice together while guests watched. Then the newlyweds would have their first dance together. After that, other guests would join in. A full orchestra would provide music, waltzes, polkas, other fashionable dances. Some brides and grooms had taken dancing lessons specifically to prepare for this moment. The dancing would continue for hours. Guests would mingle, dance, drink champagne, celebrate. The bride and groom would be expected to circulate, spending time with different guests, accepting congratulations, maintaining their formal social roles even while presumably exhausted. Eventually, usually around midnight or later, the couple would depart. They typically wouldn't leave for their honeymoon that night. They'd stay at the bride's family mansion, or possibly at a hotel. The honeymoon journey would begin the next day. The departure created another formal moment. The bride might change into a traveling costume, a special outfit designed for leaving the reception. Guests would gather to watch them leave, perhaps throwing rice or flower petals as the couple departed for their wedding night. Newspaper coverage would appear the next day. Society pages would describe the wedding in detail: the bride's dress, the decorations, the guest list, what was served, who attended. For prominent families, the coverage might be extensive, with multiple columns describing every aspect of the event. This coverage was important. It confirmed the wedding's success, maintained the family's social standing, and created a permanent record of the occasion. Families would save these newspaper articles, sometimes having them framed or preserved in wedding albums. Wedding gifts during the Gilded Age were both numerous and expensive, reflecting the wealth of the families involved and their social circles. The gifts would be displayed before the wedding, usually in a dedicated room that guests could visit during the reception. This wasn't considered tacky or boastful, it was expected. Displaying the gifts showed the couple's social importance and gave guests a chance to see what everyone had given. The types of gifts followed predictable patterns. Silver was the most common and expected gift. Tea services, candelabras, serving platters, utensil sets, all in sterling silver, all expensive, all traditional. A single large silver piece might cost several $100s. Complete sets could reach into the thousands. Crystal was nearly as universal. Vases, bowls, stemware sets. Fine crystal from European manufacturers. Like silver, this came in sets and individual pieces, all expensive, all meant to be displayed and used in the couple's future home. China followed similar patterns. Complete dinner service for 12, 24, or more place settings. Fine porcelain from established manufacturers. Often multiple complete sets, one for formal dinners, another for less formal occasions. Linens were common gifts from female friends and relatives, tablecloths, napkins, sheets, all monogrammed with the couple's initials, all fine quality. These were practical but also expensive, with elaborate monograms adding to the cost. Furniture pieces were gifted by close family or very wealthy friends, an occasional table, a decorative piece, a small desk, furniture that would work in a mansion's formal rooms. Jewelry was reserved for the very closest family members. The groom typically gave his bride an expensive piece of jewelry as a wedding gift, perhaps a diamond bracelet or necklace worth $1,000 to $10,000 or more. The bride would give him something significant too, often a watch or expensive cufflink. Parents sometimes gave extraordinary gifts, a house, trust funds, or extremely valuable items. When Consuelo Vanderbilt married the Duke of Marlborough, her family essentially gave a fortune as part of the marriage settlement, along with jewels and other items. For major society weddings, the collective value of gifts could reach into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Imagine a room filled with sterling silver, fine crystal, expensive china, monogrammed linens, furniture, and jewelry. The display was impressive, even overwhelming. The bride was responsible for keeping track of all gifts and writing thank you notes promptly. This was a significant task after a large wedding. Each gift required a personalized note acknowledging the item and expressing gratitude. For a wedding with 400 guests and perhaps 200 distinct gifts, this meant weeks of note writing. The gifts served multiple purposes beyond their practical use. They demonstrated the social importance of the couple. The number and quality of gifts reflected their position in society. They also represented the couple's community. The people willing to give expensive gifts were confirming their relationship with the family. Some gifts were more about display than function. Elaborate silver pieces or decorative crystal might never actually be used but would be displayed in the couple's home as evidence of their social standing and their wedding success. The tradition of displaying gifts gradually faded over the 20th century. It came to be seen as showing off, as focusing too much on material value. But during the Gilded Age, it was expected and appreciated. The gift display was part of the wedding experience, something guests looked forward to seeing. The trousseau deserves special discussion because it represented a massive expense and significant preparation during the brief engagement period. A trousseau was the bride's complete wardrobe for her married life, not just a few new outfits, but everything she would need for potentially a year or more. This included day dresses, multiple outfits for different occasions, morning dresses for receiving calls at home, afternoon dresses for tea and social visits, walking suits for going out. Each dress is appropriate for its specific purpose and time of day. Evening gown, at least a dozen or more elaborate gowns for dinners, balls, and formal events. These were the most expensive pieces in the trousseau, each potentially costing hundreds of dollars. Traveling clothes, special outfits designed for the honeymoon journey, comfortable for travel but still stylish and appropriate for being seen in public. Lingerie and undergarments, dozens of sets. Remember that women wore multiple layers: chemise, corset cover, petticoat. You needed multiple sets of everything to allow for washing and rotation. Hats, gloves, shoes, coordinated accessories for every outfit. Hats were required for going out. Gloves were essential. Shoes had to match each ensemble. This added up quickly. Tea gowns and informal wear, outfits for wearing at home when not receiving guests. These were more comfortable than formal dresses, but still stylish. Negligées and robes, appropriate sleepwear for a wealthy married woman. The cost of a complete trousseau could easily reach $2,000 to $5,000, sometimes up to $10,000 for the most elaborate collections. In today's money, that's $60,000 to $300,000 or more. Just for clothes. For high-profile brides, the trousseau became legendary. Consuelo Vanderbilt's trousseau, when she married the Duke of Marlborough, was reportedly extraordinary. Dozens and dozens of outfits, each custom-made by fashionable dressmakers, costing a fortune collectively. The trousseau was packed in special trunks, large, sturdy, expensive trunks designed specifically for extended travel. A bride might have multiple trunks, each packed with different types of clothing. These trunks themselves could cost hundreds of dollars. For honeymoons lasting several months, the trousseau had to cover a wide range of situations: formal dinners in Paris, casual exploration in Italy, mountain resort wear in Switzerland, beach outfits for the Riviera. The wardrobe had to be comprehensive and appropriate for every possible occasion. Servants would accompany the couple on the honeymoon specifically to manage these wardrobes. A lady's maid would help the bride dress, maintain her clothing, pack and unpack trunks as they traveled. This wasn't just helpful, it was necessary given the complexity of the clothing. The trousseau represented preparation for a new social role. As a married woman, you would be hosting dinners, attending events, being seen in society. Your wardrobe needed to reflect your status and your husband's position. The trousseau ensured you were prepared from day one of your marriage. For some brides, assembling the trousseau was exciting, shopping for beautiful clothes, working with fashionable dressmakers, preparing for a new life. For others, particularly those in arranged marriages, it was just another overwhelming task during an already stressful time. The tradition of elaborate trousseaux gradually faded over the 20th century. Modern brides don't assemble complete year-long wardrobes before marriage. But during the Gilded Age, the trousseau was essential, expected, and expensive. Another aspect of how the wealthy approached marriage as a major production requiring extensive preparation. Gilded Age honeymoons were not quick weekend trips. We're talking about 6 weeks to 3 months of travel, almost always to Europe, almost always to luxury destinations. The standard honeymoon itinerary included: the French Riviera was extremely popular. Nice, Cannes, Monte Carlo. These winter resort towns offered mild weather, beautiful settings, casinos, social life. Wealthy Americans flocked there during winter months. A honeymoon couple would fit right into this social scene. Italian destinations were common. The Italian lakes, Como, Garda, offered romantic settings. Rome provided cultural attractions. Venice was considered particularly romantic for newlyweds. The Swiss Alps attracted those interested in winter sports. St. Moritz and other mountain resorts offered skiing, skating, and mountain scenery. This was more adventurous than the Riviera, but still luxurious. Egypt was an exotic option for longer honeymoons. The winter season was the best time to visit, avoiding extreme heat while experiencing ancient sites. This was more ambitious and expensive, but very fashionable for adventurous couples. Some couples did extended grand tours, several months traveling through multiple European countries, seeing major cities and cultural sites, meeting European society. The travel arrangements were first class all the way. Ocean liner passage to Europe in the best cabin, the finest hotels at each destination, private guides and transportation. Every detail was arranged for maximum comfort and luxury. The cost could easily reach $3,000 to $10,000 or more for an extended honeymoon. In today's money, that's $90,000 to $300,000 or more. This represented more than many Americans earned in a lifetime, spent on a few months of travel. Servants accompanied the couple. The bride's maid was essential for managing her elaborate wardrobe. The groom might bring his valet. These servants handled the practical details: packing, unpacking, maintaining clothes, managing logistics, allowing the couple to simply enjoy themselves. For brides marrying European aristocracy, the dollar princesses, the honeymoon often served an additional purpose. It was an opportunity for the groom to introduce his American bride to European society, to show her their future home, to begin integrating her into her new role. Consuelo Vanderbilt's honeymoon with the Duke of Marlborough included visiting Blenheim Palace, where they would live, and being introduced to British aristocratic society. The length of these honeymoons seems extraordinary by modern standards. 6 weeks to 3 months away from work, family, responsibilities. But wealthy couples didn't have jobs to return to. They had trust funds or investments that generated income without requiring their labor. They could afford to be gone for months without consequences. The honeymoon was considered the last time the couple would be relatively free before assuming the full responsibilities of married life. Once they returned, they'd establish their household, begin entertaining, and take on social obligations. The honeymoon was a brief window of relative freedom and privacy. Though privacy was limited, even on the honeymoon, they traveled in social circles, stayed at hotels where they'd encounter other wealthy Americans and Europeans, attended dinners and events. You couldn't completely escape society even on your honeymoon. For some couples, the extended honeymoon was genuinely romantic, a chance to get to know each other, to enjoy travel together, to create memories. For others, particularly those in arranged marriages, it must have been awkward or difficult. Months alone with someone you barely knew, expected to behave as a loving couple while still essentially strangers. When the honeymoon ended, the couple would return home, usually to a house that had been gifted by family or purchased as part of the marriage settlement. The real work of being a wealthy married couple would begin, but they'd return with trunks full of purchases, memories of exotic places, and hopefully a better sense of each other than they'd had when they married. Behind the romantic winter settings and elaborate celebrations was a reality that was often less beautiful. Many of these marriages were essentially arranged, not necessarily in the sense of the bride and groom never meeting before the wedding, though that occasionally happened, but in the sense that families negotiated matches, applied pressure, made it clear which proposals were acceptable and which weren't. The process often worked like this. A mother would identify appropriate prospects for her daughter, young men from suitable families with adequate resources. She'd arrange for introductions at social events. She'd encourage or discourage various suitors based on their eligibility. If a promising suitor emerged, the families would negotiate behind the scenes. Financial settlements would be discussed. What the bride's family would provide. What provisions the groom would make for his wife's security. These conversations often happened before any proposal, ensuring that if the young man did propose, the family terms were already agreed upon. The young woman might have minimal say in this process. She'd be told which men were acceptable options. She'd be discouraged from considering men her family deemed inappropriate. If she expressed preferences, they might or might not be honored, depending on whether they aligned with family interests. The pressure to accept appropriate proposals was intense. If a suitable man proposed, saying no could be difficult. Your family had expectations. Your mother had been working to arrange this match. Refusing might mean disappointing everyone, facing family anger, potentially damaging your prospects for future matches. Some young women openly resisted. Consuelo Vanderbilt famously did not want to marry the Duke of Marlborough. She was in love with someone else. But her mother Alva was determined to make her a duchess. Alva allegedly threatened suicide if Consuelo refused. Under this pressure, Consuelo agreed to the marriage despite her feeling. The dollar princesses, American heiresses who married European titles, were particularly likely to be in arranged marriages. European aristocrats needed American money to maintain their estates. American families wanted European titles for prestige. These marriages were business transactions negotiated between families, with the bride and groom as participants in deals largely arranged by others. Even in what appeared to be love matches, family pressure and expectations played significant roles. Young women had been raised knowing their primary purpose was to marry well. They'd been educated and prepared specifically for this. Disappointing family expectations wasn't really an option for most. Divorce was extremely difficult and extremely scandalous during this era. A woman who married badly would likely remain married. There was no easy way out. This made the wedding day both a beginning and potentially a trap. Once you were married, you were committed to that choice regardless of how it turned out. Some marriages were genuinely happy. Some couples did fall in love or grew to love each other. But the system wasn't designed to prioritize the individual's happiness. It was designed to create appropriate alliances, maintain family positions, and transfer wealth in controlled ways. For brides, the wedding day was often terrifying. You were committing to spending your life with someone you might barely know. You'd have no real independence. You'd go from your father's household to your husband's control. And the wedding night itself was approaching, which for many young women was frightening given the lack of sex education and the expectations they'd face. The romantic winter setting, the elaborate dress, the beautiful ceremony, all of it created an appearance of joy and love that might not reflect reality. Some brides went through these celebrations feeling trapped, scared, or resigned to futures they hadn't chosen. The social pressure to appear happy made it worse. You couldn't cry during your wedding, though Consuelo did. You couldn't express doubt publicly. You had to smile, accept congratulations, pretend this was the happiest day of your life, even if it wasn't. This is the dark side of Gilded Age Christmas weddings. Behind the beauty and excess was a system that often prioritized family interests over individual happiness, that rushed young women into marriages they hadn't fully chosen, that created spectacular celebrations masking less romantic reality. The tradition of December weddings survived the Gilded Age, though the context changed dramatically. December remains one of the most popular wedding months. The holiday atmosphere, the winter beauty, the festive season, these still appeal to couples choosing wedding dates. Many modern brides choose December specifically for the seasonal aesthetic, just as Gilded Age families did. The compressed timeline disappeared. Modern couples typically take 12 to 18 months to plan weddings, sometimes longer. The idea of getting engaged in December and married in January seems impossibly rushed. We expect time for planning, for getting to know each other better, for making careful decisions. The mansion venues are gone, demolished or converted to other uses. Modern weddings happen in churches, hotels, wedding venues, outdoor spaces, not in private mansions transformed for the occasion. This democratized weddings somewhat. You don't need to own a 50-room mansion to have a beautiful wedding. The elaborate trousseau tradition faded. Brides today might buy some new clothes for their honeymoon, but assembling a complete year-long wardrobe before marriage is unthinkable. We buy clothes as needed, gradually, not all at once before marriage. The gift display tradition ended too. Modern couples register for gifts, but displaying them for guests to view during the reception is considered tacky. The emphasis shifted away from showcasing material wealth towards celebrating the relationship. Arranged marriages among wealthy families largely disappeared, at least in America. While family pressure and expectations still exist, and while social and economic factors still influence who marries whom, the overt negotiation of matches became unacceptable. Modern weddings are supposed to be based on love, on individual choice, not on family arrangements. The extremely formal structure loosened. Modern weddings can be personalized, customized, adjusted to reflect the couple's preferences. The standardized Gilded Age wedding template, ceremony, seated dinner, dancing, expected traditions, has been supplemented by countless variations and personal touches. The relative costs decreased. While modern weddings are still expensive, the amounts spent by middle-class and even wealthy families are fractions of what Gilded Age families spent in relative terms. A modern wedding costing $50,000 is considered expensive, but that's nowhere near the equivalent of Gilded Age wedding costs relative to average incomes. What persisted is the romantic ideal of the winter wedding, the image of a bride in white against snow and evergreen, the warm light of candles or decorations, the festive atmosphere of the holiday season. This aesthetic established during the Gilded Age remains appealing. The tradition of extended honeymoons shortened but didn't disappear. Modern couples might take 1 or 2 weeks rather than 3 months, but the honeymoon remains an expected part of marriage, a chance for the couple to be alone together, to travel, to begin their married life. Some elements of gift-giving traditions persisted in modified form. The expectation that friends and family will give the couple items to establish their household continues, though the specific items have changed with the times. The fundamental difference is autonomy. Modern couples, even wealthy ones, have far more control over their weddings and their marriages than Gilded Age brides and grooms did. The decisions are theirs to make: when to marry, whom to marry, how to celebrate, where to live. The Gilded Age Christmas wedding tradition was built on wealth, social pressure, family control, and highly compressed timelines. What survived into modern times was stripped of most of that context. We kept the aesthetic, the winter beauty, the festive atmosphere, while discarding the system that created it. So that's the story of Gilded Age Christmas weddings, when December was marriage season, when young women moved from debut to marriage in just a few months, when elaborate winter celebrations in private mansions marked the beginning of marriages that were often arranged rather than chosen. The strategic timing after the debutante season, the pressure to get engaged quickly, the compressed timeline from engagement to wedding, the romantic winter backdrop that made everything look beautiful, all of this was carefully orchestrated. The system was designed to move young women into appropriate marriages efficiently, using the holiday season as the perfect setting. The weddings themselves were spectacular: elaborate dresses, mansion ceremonies, multi-course dinners, extensive gifts, complete trousseaux, months-long European honeymoons. The wealth on display was extraordinary. The celebrations were memorable. The whole production was impressive. But behind the beauty was often pressure, limited choice, arranged marriages, and young women terrified about their futures. The romantic setting didn't change the reality that many of these marriages were business arrangements between families, with the bride and groom as participants in deals they hadn't fully controlled. Some traditions survived. December weddings remain popular. Honeymoons are still expected. Gift-giving continues. But the system that created Gilded Age Christmas weddings disappeared. The mansions are gone. The compressed timeline is gone. The arranged marriages are gone. What remains is the romantic ideal of a winter wedding, stripped of the context that created it. We kept the beautiful aesthetic while discarding the system that made it necessary. Good night.